Hi, I'm Stephen Carson, coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. I'm going to bring on my guest pretty quick because we have some things to talk about before we get into the articles of the week for our econ minis this week. I guess main thing I'd want to mention is just that my best support comes from people on Subscribestar, most of whom donate a paltry $5 a month. But enough people do that, it starts to add up to something. So would appreciate your support as we continue. So far, I have not been profiting. Everything goes into the show at this point, and it will for a while as we continue to fix various production issues and stuff. So let's bring on someone new to the show, and that is the Prudentialist. Hello, sir.
Hello, happy to be here.
Um, let's see. Oh, well, first thing is I wanted to mention your. I know the other thing I was going to do. Let's start with the Charlemagne bit. That's the other thing I was going to talk about. So if you look at the show notes this week for the Prudentialist, I was going to point to his YouTube channel, and he pointed out that he wanted to make use of our new cool thing, our new cool website, courtesy of our friend Charlemagne. It's called Find My Friends, spelled Frens. Find My Friends. I'm sorry, is it .net?
Yeah, .net.
Yeah. Findmyfriends.net. You can go to the show notes or just type findmyfriends.net into your browser. And Charlemagne put this site together, and it features a number of us. Academic Agent, Prudentialist is on there. I'm on there. Morgoth is on there. What do we like to say? It's diverse and inclusive over at Find My Friends. We got both kinds, country and Western. And so all it is basically, if you saw Linktree, it's a little bit something like that. It's basically a way for people to share the main places that you need to know for where they're putting something out, right? So our Twitter accounts would be there, our Gab accounts, our YouTube channels, things like that. So that is the place to go to see Prudentialist YouTube channel as well as other places he puts output. So I had not mentioned this site. We've been cooking it. Charlemagne has been cooking it in the background, which we were participating a little. Big thanks to our friend Charlemagne for doing that. And it's a great site. You should definitely put it in your bookmarks. Okay, having said all that, Prudentialist, I've got you slotted, typecast in my mind as geopolitics, international relations, but I don't want to put you in too narrow of a box. So could you talk a little bit about sort of if people are interested in your content, what are they going to find there?
Sure. So while international relations and the geopolitical aspect of it is sort of the mainstay, I do that every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, usually well into the afternoons after church for the audience. And it'll cover everything from, what's going on in the world to international relations theory. So giving you sort of the ABCs of how the world and statecraft works. But outside of that, I provide commentary on cultural matters, as well as trying to provide some sort of aspect of mentorship for younger men, because like myself and those younger than me, a lot of us were raised online, and we're trying to make sense of how to take that online political space and transform it into something productive in the real world. So if you're a fan of those kind of things, along with the outdoors, I'm well known for my fishing videos, sort of like Morgoth, we're at the pond. So those are the things that I talk about and do.
Cool. And just in case, I suspect because of the kind of things we've covered on this show, we have some folks who actually hear something like international relations theory and aren't scared off. Having said that, I just want to push on that point a little further. I have not covered it on this show. I've shared it a bit on Twitter, but I started reading through John Mearsheimer's The Israel Lobby. In terms of straight off international relations theory, his main book would be.
His main book is The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which was published in 1992.
Yeah, Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Thank you. Which logically I should have read first, but because of my own personal interests, I had to start with Israel Lobby, and then I'll get to Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Anyway, I'm sure it'll all work out in the end. But just from my little exposure to Mearsheimer, and of course he is just one of many, one school or one kind of thinker, and you cover a lot of them. Let me tell you, I mean, how do I put this? As a longtime antiwar.com guy, shall we say.
Yeah.
Old friend of Justin Raimondo's. I'm used to thinking of the foreign policy establishment as idiotic and dangerous, right? That doesn't mean that everybody who thinks about international relations is an idiot. John Mearsheimer is not an idiot. You would agree,
Oh, by
right?
no means. By no means.
I mean, you could critique limitations in his thinking or something like that, but you will learn if you read Mearsheimer. You will learn, and you will see the world differently and probably more accurately. I think it's fair to say, right?
Oh, absolutely. He's one of my biggest influences, and I mean, he comes from a
Mm-hmm.
long tradition of realists in the realist school.
Right, and I mentioned the Israel lobby, but just to give a picture of the kind of I don't know what to call it, courage. I don't know. John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt put out this book on the Israel lobby, and this was just a topic you didn't touch for
No.
all my life, right? And then the Israel
Yeah.
lobby came out, and suddenly it was a topic you could talk about. Like, so give the man some due. Not only, as you're alluding to here, does he have some theoretical, um, sound theoretical viewpoint to teach, but he isn't a weak figure, right? He
Oh
speaks
no, he's
boldly.
he's considered a giant in the international
Yeah.
relations field.
Right. And he speaks boldly, and he will say, I think Washington is being an idiot, in the Ukraine or whatever, right? He'll be
Yeah.
pretty straightforward about it. Yeah. So I said all that because I just could imagine people hearing like international relations theory and being like, what is this, like, neocons talking about foreign policy or something? No. I think there's a lot more to be gained than you might guess if you're thinking of like the foreign policy establishment by listening to the Prudentialist and sort of the scholarship he brings to bear. So a distinction
Yeah.
worth making. You follow me, right?
I do, yes, and I mean it's not just one school. I make it very clear that I
Yeah.
fall into the realist tradition, but on the channel and on the lectures, we've covered everything from sort of like the liberal schools of thought, and in fact, this Sunday we're taking a look at one of Mearsheimer's biggest critics, which is the constructivist school. So they focus on
Hmm.
how anarchy is what a state makes of it. So it'll be fun to take a comparison between the two.
Right. Right. So really good stuff. Just wanted to make sure to sell Prudentialist to my audience really well. Okay. So speaking of me, Prudentialist, Ryan, others, a number of us will be at an event next month. In fact, it's just a couple weeks away, really. Um, just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. The link is in the show notes. A number of us will be speaking. Um, I believe there is room for you to join us if you haven't.
Yeah,
Obviously,
tickets are
like,
still
why
on sale.
tickets are still on sale. Why would you do this? Well, one big reason I think is that um, this our whole circle has been an online group of people, right? We kind of pretty much all know each other virtually, but there is great value in meeting in real life, I think. I personally have made a big effort to go to the Ludwig von Mises Institute over the years and go to events. And so I got to meet Hans Hermann Hoppe and be at the bar with him late at night, Uh, there's something there, right, that you don't get out of reading somebody's books or even watching their YouTube channel. So I think there's real benefit to gathering in person, and it's a chance to form something like normal human relationships, which we don't seem to get much of these days, while we're made to work from home and all this. So anyway, I think there's going to be interesting speakers. So really worth your time to seek this out. Check the link, take a look over the material, see who's speaking, and give it your consideration. Furthermore, in about a little less than 3 hours, Distributist, our friend Distributist, will be hosting a stream about the event, featuring some of the speakers. And I think you're planning to be on that one, right?
I think I'm going to be on it. I know that 21st Reaction will be on it, Clossington, and I think Paul Fahrenheit. So you're going to get a wide
Okay.
array of the different speakers and speeches that'll be presented.
And see the inclusiveness and diversity of our community. It's a beautiful
Oh,
thing.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So having gotten all that done, let's go to our first article, which I'm not on. Or oh, maybe I am. Okay. I think I accidentally ended up on the right thing. Let's see. Yes, good. I'm on the first article. Okay, let me just make sure that's looking good for you folks. Okay, All right. So how easy money inflated corporate profits. Um, okay. So we've discussed a bit on the show about inflation, where we're focusing to some degree on consumer price inflation, and we shared lumber memes last year, right? Which was fun. Um, by the way, my wife is a purchaser of lumber because of various projects we do around our gentleman's farm or hobby farm, whatever you want to call it, 4.5 acre farm. Um, and she was like, "Wow, this piece of wood I want is really expensive. Is it normally this high?" And he said, "It is about double the typical, the price it would have been, a year or two ago or whatever." So evidently the lumber memes are still applicable. Anyway, we usually talk about consumer inflation, but in this article, I thought this was really worth highlighting because he talks about the effect of the money that's been pouring out from the Fed on corporate profits. Because as you might have noticed, especially if you have a 401k or something like that, um, while some things seem to have been challenging these last 2 years, profits for, say, big companies seem to have been doing really, really well in the midst of the troubles these last 2 years. So he says the elephant in the room is the fantastic surge in U.S. corporate profits that monetary inflation has fueled during the second year of the pandemic. In fact, I think later here he's going to narrow it down a little more. Oh, maybe not. Anyway, so he says, perhaps if truth were known, the Fed did not plan back in spring 2020, when devising their anti-COVID stimulus, a huge inflation tax, nor a profit bonanza. But he basically goes on to say that it seems like once they started doing it, there were a lot of incentives to keep doing it. When the Fed machinery of money is splurging out fantastic profits amid understandable praise from the powerful beneficiaries, why hurry to make an exit from emergency stimulus? So his implication here is, they had their usual emergency justification for doing some extraordinary things, which happened to benefit, the corporate bottom lines. And then they found that they didn't want to end that emergency behavior too quickly, right? So what are we talking about here? Oh yeah, here's where we really bracket the jump in corporate profits. U.S. corporate profits increased from, let's see, he gets into this thing about adjusted profits, and I don't think I'm going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just going to ignore the adjusted profits. Okay. U.S. corporate profits increased from 2.2 trillion in 2019, the whole year before the pandemic, so for the entirety of 2019, right, to 3.1 trillion annualized in Q3 of 2021. So that's a jump of well, not quite there, but getting near $1 trillion increase in profit from 2019 to 2021. That's quite a jump. And of course, from percentage term, that would be a, let's see, so from 2 to 3, that's nearly a 50% increase on the order of. So he says almost all the surge occurred in the period between winter 2021 and autumn 2021. So that would be, say, the first 9 months or something like that of last year is where you really saw the jump. Okay, so he says, okay, there's a couple factors, right? It's never simple. There's a couple factors going on here. One is the fantastic boom in demand for home digital technology, coupled with monopoly power in some cases for the suppliers of this. And so he talks about Microsoft, Apple, perhaps Amazon Web Services. It's good times for providers of digital technology, right? Because we're working from home, we need to work remotely, etc. And he says, but it's not just the big companies, because there was stellar earnings growth for the universe of U.S. small and mid-cap companies in general. So, okay, so corporate profit did really well in 2021 is the point. And now he's going to give us the mechanism. How has monetary inflation driven the profit boom? Quite simply, demand across an array of business sectors has surged, while a range of factors, including so-called global bottlenecks, have been constraining supply. Black Horse has helped us look a little bit at some of the shipping of like natural gas, for example, which we'll be touching on today, natural gas. Um, and we've been seeing that the shipping costs have really been climbing in certain parts of the world, and it has had an effect on the on prices. Um, okay, so should we expect this profit surge to last or to reverse itself? Right, because as he points out in a the free market model, right, the competitive economy, profits are temporary. You see an opportunity or whatever, you earn some profits, and then competitive forces start coming in and reducing those profits because they start getting some of those profits and competing with you, and the profits start to dissipate, right? So is that natural process is something we expect to see? He says, well, monetary inflation has persisted quite a while, and this far predates the pandemic. He also points to the natural hazards of monopoly empowerment, which digitalization causes. Now, I have to admit, I don't totally understand why digitalization means you empower monopoly, have monopoly empowerment. Um, I could believe it, but I would love for someone to connect the dots for me on that.
Does he
So,
mean by chance the
yeah,
monopoly empowerment, which digitalization causes? Does he mean just more emphasis on, say, Google or AWS, which of course has a vast market share of, say, our internet or our ad traffic online?
right, but why wouldn't why wouldn't the growth in the digital market from everybody working from home and so forth, and everything that's happened in the last few years, why wouldn't it result in a lot more people entering the market, right? It could
Hmm.
result in a lot more competition because there's a bigger pie, room for more people to get in there. Um, I don't know. Maybe this is where you get into like network effects or something like that, right?
Maybe. It just seems that
Yeah.
everyone has been reliant on, say, Google Meeting, Slack, Zoom. It's almost as if you have very few choices. So even if the pie has
Right.
expanded, right, maybe potentially there's just a nudged choice or a sort of forced top-down preference.
Right. Now, yeah, Microsoft Teams, Google Meetings, right? Now, Zoom was something that seemed to just pop out of nowhere in the last 2 years. I'd never heard of it. And
Neither
then
did I.
suddenly everybody was using it. So I kind of see them as entrants, people who I'm not saying they were, I don't know when the company started, right? But they became a player in the last 2 years. So
Definitely.
that seems to go against that story of monopoly empowerment, right? Zoom came along and Microsoft and Google were like, who are these guys, right? Why do we have to compete with them? Um, okay, so um, okay, maybe he explains it a little more. He says we should consider here monopoly in the form of entrenched advantages for the so-called star firm in many industrial sectors, which assembles specific technology inputs which cannot be easily replicated by outsiders. Yeah. Anyway, he's just saying there's an advantage to the people who were already there. Certainly, if you already had the infrastructure to support, uh, real-time video meetings, you were in a nice position in the last 2 years, right? Not all of us could have built out that infrastructure. No, you couldn't really build out that infrastructure in a few days. That
Yeah.
was a whole investment required. Um, okay. Anyway, finishing up with this, uh, he is looking towards this falling apart at some point. The how does he put it? Reverting to the mean. The earnings of the big companies, big tech companies, starting to look a little more normal as we come out of this unusual situation we've been in the last 2 years. He says the catalyst to asset market deflation would be a dose of reality, which prompts, first of all, the U.S. equity market space. So he's suggesting that you're going to see it in stocks first. Perceptions there would shift. The elephant, the giant profit surge of 2021, would lose its permanence and become transitory in appearance. Um, Now, as we're discussing with Black Horse in our ongoing series about the 2008 crash and its consequences, uh, the Fed will do things like just buy stocks of company, well, buy bonds. Sorry, bonds. They'll buy bonds of companies to basically keep them pumped up. if it looks like big companies are starting to, if they're in market trouble, right? So at this point, they seem to see their role, and we'll be getting into this in 2 weeks. Unfortunately, there'll be no show next week. In 2 weeks, we'll can finish up the series with Black Horse, and he will show us how the Fed is able to kind of like keep crashes from happening again. I mean, that's what they always say every time. Now we have it under control and there'll never be a crash again, right? And they've been saying this after every crash, like all my life, and before that. But the mechanisms they are using now are pretty amazing. Like I said, just literally buying company bonds and oh, it looks like this company's stock price is not doing well. Well, we'll just start buying their debt. So anyway, crazy. Okay, well, let's look at the next story. This is a peek in on the central bank digital currency theme, which we discussed at length in a previous show. And I always connect it to the war on cash, right? Because there's been a trend, there's been a pattern of actions from governments and central banks and legislation all over the world to make it harder and harder to function on a cash basis. They really want you to be trackable and traceable with what you're doing economically, right? And they do this in the name of stopping, I don't know, things made with child slaves in Africa or something. But sometimes I'm not convinced that their motives are so gloriously righteous. Okay, so this is just a peek in on the story then. The Jamaica government, it turns out, is a pioneer with central bank digital currency. Who knew? So just real quick, the country's central bank successfully completed the first pilot test. By first, they mean globally. The first pilot test in early January, so just earlier this month. The country's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, has predicted the majority of the Jamaican population would be quick to adopt the digital currency. He thinks over 70% will be using central bank digital currency within 5 years. I couldn't help but note, as we've seen before in like the Fed's mission statement, the Jamaican Prime Minister highlighted reduced banking costs and inclusivity of central bank digital currency. Remember, we had noted that the Federal Reserve now talks about like inclusiveness is one of their goals. Like this is what you want from your central bank. Anyway, so the Bank of Jamaica, the country's central bank, has become a pioneer in CBDC efforts with one of the first completed nationwide pilot projects in the world. That's all I wanted to say about that, but I thought that was quite interesting. Any comments? You had been struck by this story, Prudentialist?
It reminded me a while back. I remembered that MarketWatch had done an article, I want to say back in 2019, back when Facebook was trying really hard to get their own kind of digital currency in place, and they had plans with Visa and I think a few other banks as well. And that kind of fell by the wayside by American regulators. And I just find it interesting that this project by Facebook is sort of picked up for under the CBDCs by the Fed and other central banks.
Yeah, I get the feeling that it's part of the Build Back Better, the new world that they're planning for us as we come out of the pandemic. Digital IDs, digital currency, government controlled digital currency, obviously. In fact,
yeah, why worry about the coin or cash shortages when you have your phone?
Right. Some people have gone so far, and I feel like this is getting a little too 4D chess here. A thick conspiracy, we might call it. Some people have gone so far as to say, Bitcoin, it was a Fed operation. They were Feds all along. It's just to soften us up and get us used to digital currency so that the government digital currency could be shoved down our throat. Well, the government, like all of us, sees opportunities and takes advantages of them. It doesn't mean that they did it. It doesn't mean that Satoshi is actually, at the CIA or something, right? I find this implausible, but who knows? We'll never know. Okay, so next story. Now, this is from a month ago at Mises.org. Biden's War Against Fossil Fuels is a War Against Ordinary People by Mark Hendrickson. So I'm going to try to not lay too much emphasis on what he talks about prices. I'm going to actually show you a chart on natural gas, though, which is interesting because we were talking about natural gas back in the fall, and the prices were high, and then they actually dropped as it went into the cold months, and then something's happened, which I'll show you. Anyway, so what is Biden up to with his fossil fuel policies? Well, here's a sampling. He canceled completion of the Keystone XL pipeline. He banned drilling for oil in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. He greatly curtailed the issuance of leases for companies to develop fossil fuel resources underneath public lands and waters. And since then, and I think the author is implying there's a causality here, since then, the prices of gasoline, oil, and natural gas have risen quite a bit. In fact, globally, and we were talking about this, I think, with Black Horse in certain parts of Europe, globally, many countries are already in the midst of a full-blown energy crisis. There are critical shortages of fossil fuels at a time when energy from so-called renewable sources, but this author prefers to call them intermittent energy sources, have fallen far short of expectations. I suppose he says intermittent, an educated guess here, but I suppose he says that because solar power is dependent on having a clear day, wind power is dependent on the wind blowing, right? So you can't totally count on these things. So in Brazil, China, India, Europe, and other countries or continents, energy shortages have led to factories cutting production, blackouts in which traffic lights are inoperative. What could go wrong? Non-functioning elevators in high-rise apartment buildings. Boy, I know a lot of people for whom that would be the scariest part of this article. Getting stuck in an elevator because of a power outage. People are like starting to have, PTSD moments here.
Oh, I thought you were going to start telling them to panic about having to take the stairs.
Right. Oh, yeah. No kidding. Right. In Manhattan, that's serious business. Vital ventilation systems not working in hospitals, etc. So there's been some issues with energy prices. But he says, what has been the response to this from the Biden administration? Team Biden has doubled down on its anti-energy policies. I like this, by the way, because it's widely suggested that perhaps Biden is not totally steering the ship up there. And so his use of Team Biden seems a nice way to hedge and say, like, Biden or someone near him, we don't know. But, anyway, nice term. I might steal that one. Okay. So Team Biden left the UN climate gathering, pleased that a plan has been put into place for the world's major banks to restrict investment in companies that produce fossil fuels. So I see a little bit of this because I'm kind of in the financial industry in my day job, but there's this stuff about like green investing. I don't know if folks would have heard of this, and that's the idea that if you're running a company that has a bunch of retirement funds, you don't just look for the best profit, the best returns for your retirees. You need to be like virtuous in your investing, right? And so you need to invest for, with climate change in mind and things like that, right? So obviously you can see where this is headed, right? This means that you probably shouldn't be investing so much in like a coal company, right? So what could go wrong? We're just going to stop investing in the companies that give us reliable energy, right? Okay, so what else did the president do? He designated 1.7 million acres of federal land in Utah as national monument. Of course, as some of you may remember, my whole joke about being the self-declared king of the moon was in part inspired by the fact that the federal government claims to own vast stretches of the western part of the United States that no one has set foot on in some cases. But they just say that they own it, and then they decide, it's not going to be used to do oil and gas exploration, like these 1.7 million acres in Utah. They're also considering the possible shutdown of another major pipeline, the Enbridge 5. I tried to check on that story. It sounds like they haven't moved on that and have even denied that. So I'm not sure how much stake to put on that. He also points to a recent nominee to be the country's next comptroller of the currency, Saul Amarova, who said, "We want America's small oil and gas companies to go bankrupt." So there's a certain tenor I think he's trying to say, a certain theme in regards to the attitude towards fossil fuels in the Biden administration. Oh, he has one more. Sorry. Most egregious, perhaps most egregious of all, when asked by a Bloomberg interviewer what her plan was to increase oil production in America, Biden's energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, responded with a belly laugh. And she said, "Hey, I can't control OPEC." Well, okay, but you're not in charge of OPEC. You're in charge of, you're the Secretary of Energy for the U.S. So why don't you, like, let there be domestic oil production, right? Anyway, also, the president has called for the Federal Trade Commission to investigate oil companies that have raised prices, because this is what they always do, right? They make it hard to do business, and then when that has consequences, they then investigate you for the consequences of the government's actions. The typical 1-2 punch. So natural gas. Here's the chart for natural gas, current chart. Notice that when we were discussing this, and I think it was in the fall, like October or so, maybe November, you see the prices spiked up there. Well, look, they're back as of just like now, the last couple days, right? Yeah, it looks like just the last couple days, they're back up to those levels again. I asked Black Horse, he provided me with this chart. I asked him, well, this is sort of throwing me here. I mean, we're going into December where it's getting cold and it's dropping, and then it spikes up now. Why now? He suggested this may be related to the Ukraine concerns that they'll be fighting in the Ukraine or something like that, which would have potential consequences for natural resources. Prudentialists might actually know something about this. Do you?
Yeah, actually, I can give some comments because a lot of what we've been seeing with this green policy or renewable energy also has a lot to do with foreign policy. So one of the biggest things with, say, natural gas in Ukraine, as well as just dealing with Russia overall, is the attempt to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from happening. It is an over the sea pipeline in order to get natural gas from Russia into Germany. And that's been a major pressure of the United States to stop. And in this earlier, prior to a couple of days ago, the German government had halted any kind of going forward or administrative clearing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, arguing that some of these subsidiaries are they're based in Switzerland, they're not based in Germany, so we're not going to sign off on it. And so that was something that had been going on. So while Europe is entering this energy crisis where prices are skyrocketing for energy, particularly natural gas, the issue that becomes is that the Americans are actually sending over cargo ships of LNG to take care of that issue, while at the same time in promoting, green energy in order to have a deal between Russia, Germany, and the United States over Nord Stream 2. The German government and the team Biden had signed off on this like $1 billion joint investment on giving Ukraine renewable energy funds that won't really go anywhere.
Yeah,
But the thing that makes this really interesting.
That sounds like pure corruption to me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what also makes this very interesting is that the German government, I believe, 2 days ago, had turned tail as things began to escalate in Ukraine. That they were going to sign off on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Which, keep in mind, one of the big impetus reasons for these pipelines to be created was to bypass West or Eastern Europe and bypass any nation sort of holding the pipelines hostage, because Ukraine did this in 2009, which caused an energy crisis for Western Europe, and Russia was like, we're not going to have this again. So I would agree with Black Horse's assessment that this has a lot to do with what's happening with Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S.
So I'm sorry, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is sort of a Russian project, I guess, or Russian-German project. They both
Yes.
They would each get benefit. Russia would get cash. Germany would get is it? I'm sorry. Is it natural gas or oil?
Yeah, natural gas.
Natural gas. Yeah. So Germany would get natural gas. Russia, I think, has quite a bit of it, if I remember correctly. Right.
Yes, and they're already a major supplier to the European Union. The last I read, they were somewhere about 45% of Europe's natural gas market share.
Right. So this would potentially increase that share, but more importantly, it sounds like take some of the risk out of their current path to bring natural gas to Europe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay, so Russia and Germany have something that works for them, but the global American empire isn't so happy with it. So I'm sorry, say again,
Yeah.
why would the gay, as we like to call it, I keep laughing saying that. Why would the gay not like this?
Well, it's the concern that came out of the post USSR foreign policy establishment was is that you don't want a unified Germany siding with Russia. You don't want some of the most powerful states on the continent to sort of potentially have a close relationship with you, because that would make your foreign policy interests on the continent a little difficult to manage, right?
Mm,
So one of the things that happened in order to sort of start preventing this was liquid natural gas and energy markets would start selling to Europe, while at the same time, we're going to try and block off Russia through sanctions. And oh, by the way, we're going to expand NATO eastward into, Eastern European former Soviet states in order to ensure that, if Germany wants to have a close relationship with Russia, you still have this large NATO or pro-Western, pro-gay bloc in between them.
hmm So yeah, the funny thought occurs to me that the neocons always bring up Neville Chamberlain in 1939, right? I wonder if though the people who are slightly more savvy, what really concerns them is 1939 to 1941 and the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, right? They don't want
You,
anything
you,
like
you,
that ever again,
so
right?
I think it was 2012 when the very first Nord Stream pipeline started. It was the it was the Poland defense minister at the time, I think, had actually made the comparison of the
Oh, we did.
Molotov-Ribbentrop
Okay,
pact. Yeah, he did.
right.
But yeah, the issue in 2009 over the transit fees, which was the big issue over not having gas flows in. I say Ukraine shut down, but it's mainly an arbitration over fees. But yeah, that was sort of the impetus cause for the Nord Stream pipelines to start, which conveniently uses Gerhard Schroeder, one of the former German chancellors, to really grease the wheels for that project to take off.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all we were going to do on this. Oh, yeah, I did have one more thing, and then we're going to get into the title of the big story of the week, which Prudentialist is going to bring us. Um, but I did want to show you a resource. This is, oh, and I have not been sharing links. I realize I try to share links, but I part of the point of this is to point you to this Twitter account. So I'm going to share that link. Okay. So Sophia Horta e Costa. I'm probably butchering the name. Anyway, she does a thread every week called All of This Happened in Chinese Markets This Week, a non exhaustive thread. And she'll highlight 9 to 12 stories, something like that, each week to give you a feel of what's going on in China. This show has tried to pay attention to China over the years. We've had Oliver Semiagog on to help us with that um, at least once. And so I'm not going to try to click into these articles or anything. I don't want to spend that much time. I'm going to leave time for our main topic. But I just wanted to give you a feel. Just read through these headlines real quick. I'm actually going to read her words, not the headlines, and give you a feel for the kind of things she covers. You might find this an interesting resource if for some reason you want to kind of keep an eye on what's going on with China financially. As we've suggested in this show, China's financial fortunes may where seem to be intertwined with the U.S. and the world. And if China crashes, that could bring everybody down, I think. But anyway, so she says China's easing cycle. I didn't even know they were doing an easing cycle. China's easing cycle begins with a bang. The central bank cuts 2 interest rates for the first time since the pandemic's early days. PBOC officials vow to avoid a collapse in credit. So they are trying to keep the economy up. They're cutting interest rates, so making money easier, right? Bullish, you say, not so fast, she says. A sell-off in China's property bonds accelerates on as traders panic again over the industry's hidden debt. Country Garden's 2024 note drops by a record. I feel like she didn't finish that sentence. Anyway, we've discussed the debt extensively in China, that they've been doing a lot of infrastructure building, overbuilding, as we've discussed, the ghost cities problem and all this. And it's all been fueled by debt. And they are aware of this, and they are trying to unwind the debt, I think. But it is still a huge issue. Okay, let's see. Oh, well, got to share this one just because it's, well, I don't know. Hong Kong's zero COVID strategy reaches new extremes. The city blames Dutch hamsters for the latest outbreak and decides to kill 2,000 of the cute little animals that we see on the screen. That's quite sad. One of my sons has a hamster. Everyone panics about the Fed and global and government bond markets sink, but not in China. Global tech stocks sink, but not in China. The flows are headed east. So her analysis is that this is not because of China's propping things up, but because people are investing in China, and that's keeping the Chinese tech stocks, for example, and the bond market there going well because they're getting investment. So that's interesting. Chinese banks reduce the costs of loans underpinning mortgages. Oh, wow. Officials say market factors will correct any short-term deviations in the yuan, suggesting currency intervention is becoming less necessary. Yeah, that worries me a little. Reduces the cost of loans underpinning mortgages. I think that means that they would get more mortgage debt, right? Which is a scary thing in light of 2008. Let's see. Oh, this is significant. Remember, we had covered the Evergrande story and how they ultimately had to, they couldn't pay on their debt anymore. They're basically going bankrupt, right? Developer, and I don't know how to say this, Yuan warns it won't repay dollar debt. It would be the 8th Chinese real estate firm to default on US dollar debt since October. So that's interesting. And then let's see. I'll just go ahead and finish. Property bonds and stocks surge after reports China's regulators are considering granting developers greater access to funds from pre-sold homes. Again, China continues to have this theme of building. It's like, haven't they overbuilt enough at this point? Country Garden sells a convertible bond after all, raising $500 million. China's largest property developer last week denied a report it had struggled to find demand for a new issue. And then finally, Beijing says it will curb the influence of tech on governments. It also pledged to renew its anti-corruption campaign. The headline I will read there is from Bloomberg: China vows no mercy in battle against corruption and big tech. I suspect there's some people who would be in sympathy with China versus big tech there. Okay, so I just wanted to spin through those really quick to give you an idea of the resource. We may keep our eye on the headlines she features again. I like to keep an eye on what's going on in China. In particular, kind of keep an eye for trouble. Okay, so having said that, let's continue. That nice segue to China. China's engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean is now up on the screen. And just quick intro, Prudentialist, which is that we did talk about China's Silk Road, New Silk Road. I think that was the name of the episode, China's New Silk Road in the past. But we really were focusing on the Middle East and Africa. I'm sure you know China's involvement there. It's always like, I don't know, building bridges and stuff, right? But there is a part of the world that Prudentialist is now going to reveal to us China has been involved with that we did not mention at all. I'm quite sure. I'm having Vuja Day or whatever. I'm quite sure we didn't say a word about South America. And so they're involved with South America.
That's significantly, yeah. So for those of you who've come over from my channel to graciously stop by and subscribe to Radical Liberation if you haven't, last time I had my show, the Sunday stream where I cover international relations, we focused on the subject of Chinese investments and their growing diplomatic pressure in South America and the Caribbean and Central America. And I thought that a good impetus to start us off or to get us sort of familiar with it was last month there was a presidential election in which a young 35-year-old millennial president president-elect by the last of the Boric administration is what it's going to be. And he's the president-elect of Chile, Gabriel Boric. And his nation has been very focused on the issue of environmentalism and calling climate change a national, and global emergency that has to be addressed. And
Hmm.
Chile is just one of three countries that has received a significant amount of investment from the Chinese, particularly in extractive commodities markets and also actual mining infrastructure. Because Chile's one of the images I think I had sent to you is a part of what's known as the lithium triangle. So for those
Was
of you who aren't
oh, oh
familiar with
okay
how,
to okay to
oh,
pop
go ahead.
that picture up? Okay, yeah, I've got it
Yeah,
on
sure, go
now.
for it.
The lithium triangle.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Chile is the long country along the west coast.
Yes. Stretching
Yeah,
all the way
okay,
down.
all the way down, right? And
And
so that
yeah, all the way
lithium
down.
triangle is right smack on Chile there, or it's
Yes.
partially on Chile, partially in these other countries, but they've got a big chunk of it. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And so
Oh,
that
lithium.
plays
Sorry,
it.
sorry. Got to state the
Oh, go for
obvious,
it.
Prudentialist. Lithium is used in batteries for portable devices, right? And probably
Yes.
some other sort of important digital industrial type uses. So it's something people are really paying attention to right now. Is lithium? Fair to say. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so not only has this been an area of significant importance, but uh, the nation of Chile has also been undergoing a constitutional convention. They've wanted to replace Augusto Pinochet's constitution from the 1980s, and I believe they've just actually finished up on it the last I checked. And they've provided a significant focus on environmental regulations, their own renewed and more toughened version of, say, a Clean Air and Clean Water Act, which has put Chinese investors in concern as to how that might affect their ongoing
Mm.
projects. But there
Hmm.
was a recent announcement that had said from BNA Americas that had stated that they expect that the ongoing tensions globally between the U.S. and China over resources, that he'll take a rather neutral stance and keep things relative to the status quo, as there has
Hmm.
been a significant increase in Chinese money flowing into the country. For instance, in I believe 2019, China's investments in Chile included about 24% of all investments, so about a quarter were purely in lithium for the industrial materials needed to, and they've purchased,
Wow.
power grid acquisitions and electric power distribution at the beginning of 2020. So they've have a significant amount of investment and interest in maintaining that flow of lithium because it's one of the largest, reservoirs or deposits in the world that has lithium that the United States doesn't actively mine or, extract it from.
By the
And
way,
that's just one area.
you've got me distracted by
Oh,
mentioning the Chilean Constitutional Convention, because
oh, sure.
I've long said as a sort of thought experiment that as much as I'm a critic of the Constitution, because I'm more of an Articles of Confederation guy, uh, as much as I'm a critic of the Constitution, good Lord, what if our current generation ripped it up and started over from scratch. Like, what a nightmare. My prediction is we'd be shooting each other in the streets within months. In other words, I think that we benefit by some structure that we inherited that, if we tried to remake it ourselves, it would be terrible. So Chile's actually done it. They've gone and done it. And at least what you've mentioned sounds like about what I would expect, right? It's sort of faddish, and it's the current, green stuff, and right.
Yeah. And I mean that in Chile's changes, right, or it's a part of a growing trend that I've talked about on my channel in South America is that yes, there are people like Bolsonaro in office, but you have seen a recent change in, say, Argentina and Mexico with the Obrador administration, and now in Chile with Gabriel Boric being in office. that there's this large sway and move to the left for more leftist governments in South America.
Mm.
And I
Hmm.
think, given how things have changed politically in South America, we will indeed see an increased relationship between China and the greater overall region as a whole. So, with that Congressional Research Service report, if we go to the economic relations, for instance, it says here, and I'll just read it verbatim. It says total China and LAC, Latin America Caribbean trade, had increased from almost 18 billion in 2002 to 316 billion in 2019. And in 2020, despite the decline in world trade due to the pandemic, China's total trade with the region only dipped slightly from 315 billion in 2020 just to 315 billion. So literally only a decrease of $1 billion between that
Hmm.
area. With almost half consisting primarily of natural resources, so metal ores, farming such as soybeans, mineral fuels, and copper, and so on. And I found the soybeans one very interesting because during the Obama administration and the ongoing tariffs that still exist with Team Biden, while American soybean farmers had a lot of their crop waiting in Chinese ports, a lot of Chinese trade had increased within the soybean market actually in South America with their farmers. So while the war was raging between the US and China, South America became the very easy alternative to begin trade and importing from.
Hmm. Okay, I went back to China's engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean. Tell me when you want me to move on.
Sure. But we'll go on. I think we can scroll down a little bit actually to the
Okay.
second page
Yeah. Okay.
because there's a lot here that is definitely worth discussing. So you can see this wonderful little graph here about
Yeah.
financing, and you will see that Venezuela's been propped up significantly, not only by China, but Russia's also seen substantial investment. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, it's a lot from 2005 to
Isn't
2020.
isn't Venezuela
Go
the
ahead.
one that's been having like a socialist crisis of some sort?
Well,
I'm
I
thinking of the
mean,
right country.
after Hugo Chavez passed, you had, I believe he was the
Yeah,
vice
that one.
president at the time, Nicolas Maduro, take over. And you've seen widespread sanctions, riots, instigation. During Trump's administration, he had the opposition leader be recognized as the president of Venezuela, although he hasn't taken power
Mm.
since.
Hmm.
But I mean, also keep in mind that you still have sort of that vestiges of the Cold War era because Venezuela and Cuba heavily rely on each other for trade. Russia invests heavily in
Hmm.
both of them, and so does the Chinese. But one of the biggest areas has also been in lending and in infrastructure. So to read from the top, it says Chinese banks, the China Development Bank, and the China Export Import Bank became large lenders of the Latin American Caribbean region more than a decade ago. Although amounts have declined in recent years, there was no such development loans in 2020. However, one of the biggest projects that these loans have been offered in use for, as well as for countries to front the cash up front, has been primarily in Brazil and Peru. One of the goals that China has had, rather than, say, creating a canal, has been sort of this trans South American continental railroad that will go through Brazil into Peru so you can connect both of the oceans via rail. And it's
Mm.
hit some snags over the course of the last several years, but mainly in 2016 when the Peruvian president was a little ambivalent about it because he thought that fronting $35 billion up front was just a little steep. But there's been recent talks and increasing the likelihood that that will actually take place and will happen.
I can't help but notice the again the infrastructure projects, right? This is the a
Yeah.
theme we see both within China and China in terms of its investing abroad. Infrastructure, bridges and power plants, and I right. It's a that you
Yeah.
see this
There's
over
a
and over
lot.
again.
But if we could move to, say, the Asian Times article that I sent you, we can start talking a lot about some of
Yeah.
this infrastructure, but also the greater regional integration, because this has a lot of both economic but geopolitical implications that I think is really worth discussing.
So
So,
wait, are you talking about the Time article?
did you get the Asian Times article? If not, then it's no big
It
deal.
says the U.S. and China are battling for influence in Latin America, and the pandemic has raised the stakes.
Well, we can work with that one.
And
That's
then there's
fine.
another one from the Diplomat called China's New Year
Actually,
Ambitions for Latin America and the Caribbean.
let's do the diplomat one. That one's
Ah,
perfect.
okay, go
Actually.
ahead.
So, we'll just start at the first paragraph. So, for anyone wondering where China's relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean will go in 2022, here's a good place to start. The China slash Community of Latin American and Caribbean States Forum Joint Action Plan 2022-2024. As with previous ministerial level forums in 2015 and 2018, China and CELAC members updated their roadmap for cooperation in various areas. And I'll stop there real quick and just sort of explain what this organization is.
Hmm.
So, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, sort of serves as a more Latin American, Central America, and South American forum as the alternative to the American led Organization of American States, which was founded during World War II as sort of a way to promote regional integration and to pursue American interests akin to sort of Roosevelt's corollary. Whereas recently, like I mentioned earlier, you're seeing this sort of influx and this move to the left culturally. And I also think just in terms of regional and ethnic identity based on, colonization and the fact that they aren't of, say, the Anglo world like the United States or Canada. And Mexican president, AMLO, as he's known, or Obrador, has said that he is wanting to have CELAC take the center stage over the OAS, and he wants to sort of bring these nations more united, akin to the European Union, to have a greater say in international affairs. Sort of as this, if you want to refer back to, say, something that Hugo Chavez would say, or even Fidel Castro about like Yankee imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows the significant shift to the left over American influence there. And in this joint action plan for 2022 and 2024, it talks about a lot of areas of trade and investment that China is interested in promoting. Not only is it to be increasing trade between the two regions, but also to share various 5G technology, nuclear reactors, and fissile material. But also, the one that was most interesting was about securing those investments through ideas of integrating security cooperation, the trading of security technology and material. Many have been speculating that this would also include things like drones and electronic surveillance. But the thing that really stuck out to me about this is that it illustrates that this region is going to be one of the many areas in the future where you're going to see a lot of like great power politics and a future influx, I think, of sanctions and trade wars to take place in the future, especially because Latin and South America are so rich in natural resources. And now that you're seeing China move in the same way that we're beginning to witness France and the United States take a greater interest in Africa, right, because of the vast amounts of Chinese investments there. I do suspect in the coming years we will see the United States try and take a similar catch-up policy towards Central and South America.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you started talking about like security deals, I'm starting to think about like the Monroe Doctrine getting tripped. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the complicated thing about that, right? Is because during the Obama administration, then Secretary of State John Kerry had made a lot of focus in discussing about how like the Monroe Doctrine is sort of like ancient history. And the
I didn't know that.
I mean, again, this is but this is the same Secretary of State that in Frankfurt, Germany, that said Americans have the right to be stupid. So I mean, take Mr. Kerry's words with what you will, but
right.
What I find, this will be, I think, an area of interest in the future, because it's very reflective of what China has done in Africa over the last 20 years. I recall in 2020, with the issue over Ethiopia and its dam, which Ethiopia receives a significant amount of funding from China, that they had also signed this joint security agreement to protect Chinese assets and investments in the country. So specifically roads, infrastructure, and the dam, which makes that such a geopolitical hotspot, I think, in the future as well. But I think that that the caveat to all of this investment, right, is the same thing that we've also seen in Africa, is that you take on a large debt or investment burden that you can't pay back, which starts debt crises and can create other issues. So this may be the double-edged sword of whether or not these economies can hold up to the amount of money that they'll be taking. Because heaven forbid you end up like Uganda and you have the Entebbe International Airport repoed by the Chinese.
Right, yeah, and I've seen some people. I'd be curious your comments on this. I've seen some people say, well, that's the whole point, is China sort of gets you in debt, and then, you're a third world country, and you got in deeper than you should have. And then, you can't service the debt, and then China basically ends up owning everything. I, I'll just take my very non-sophisticated view, put it out there, and you shoot it down. My very non-sophisticated view is China is actually interested in doing business, and I don't know that they really want their business partners, so to speak, falling apart. um that would imply that all it's all the business side of it is just a ruse to just have a Chinese empire that spans the whole globe, which to me feels a lot like projection. Right? Because that's what the Americans are like. It's not clear to me that the Chinese think exactly that way. I think they want to do business in Latin America and Africa. What's your view?
So I get torn on this because it goes
Yeah.
back to this question that was posed by Dr. Sumantra Mitra. He's part of the British Historical or the Royal Historical Society, but he's also an international relations scholar and a
Mm.
realist. And
Hmm.
he poses this really good question: is China a revisionist state or is it a status quo state? Status quo being like, do you want to just take advantage of the ongoing international order and system and benefit from it? So like akin to how like the IMF or the US aid works with, third world countries to promote their interests.
Hmm.
Similar to what you could suggest what China's doing now. Or do they have a different goal in mind? Do they want to change the world order and revise it and be something new? And I,
Hmm.
I think that it's somewhere in between. I think that they want to use the international system as it is, right? So we use like dollar diplomacy. They'll use, their own currency diplomacy
Yeah.
and incur these things to have them a part of their empire, so to speak. But I think they also want to have business. They want to circumvent the existing powers where they are. I mean, for instance, just to sort of show you what I mean by that, not too long ago, Semyagog and I talked about Kazakhstan. And one of the
Hmm.
biggest areas that Kazakhstan gets a lot of money from is the Chinese and, say, freight and rail. And the other issue, though, is that while you're talking about rolling blackouts in that article earlier about energy production worldwide,
Hmm.
China's trying to stop using coal, which is why we're seeing blackouts there, and they're trying to switch to nuclear, which means they've poured in close to like $600 billion to meet the COP 26 climate goals, and they want to use it through nuclear energy. And
Hmm.
Kazakhstan, outside of Australia, has some of the largest reserves of plutonium and uranium in the world. So
Mm.
that's
Okay.
something to keep in mind, right? Is that China has this market interest to do business to secure its own needs. So why not? They are dependent upon the status quo, but I do think that they're interested in having business, because if you can have a successful business relationship, we've seen that wonderful gif right from like 1988 to 2018 where the world's number one trading partner shifts from the United States to China. I do think that your idea of saying they actually want to do business, I'm very much inclined to agree with that. I don't think that they want
Mm.
these nations indebted and incapable of having economic growth or producing infrastructure or having an extractive commodities market, because then China doesn't benefit. China doesn't get the
Right.
resources that it needs. It doesn't have the economic barrier to, say, the United States, the European Union, or Russia. All of which I think in this new sort of multipolar world order, it will be sort of a four-player game between the United States, the EU, Russia, and China.
Right. And we've emphasized on this show before in our China analysis, that phrase you said, supplying their own needs, jumped out at me. Right. Because we've emphasized how the large size of China on the map is a little bit deceptive because, for example, they don't have much arable land. Despite that, all that all those square miles, um, there's not a lot of arable land, and
Yeah.
they are a big food importer. A lot of people wouldn't think that, right? They might have this picture that China is just resource rich and just looking to dominate everybody, right? Well, not really necessarily, right? Because to a great degree, they're resource poor, at least in certain respects, and they're desperate to, feed their population at the most basic, but also some other things, right, like lithium and things like that that have to do with not food, but the technology manufacture that they do, for example. So yeah, I think sometimes I think that the picture of China, the simplistic picture of China's just looking to go dominate everything, is that they are just doing great and now they're ready to go on and take over the world, you know? Whereas,
Yeah.
as we've highlighted on this show, they've got a lot of issues. um, they need to hold China together politically, which is not as easy as you might think. They need to feed their people, which is also challenging. And then they've got an economy that, to me, does not look that sound, with a lot of debt in it and so forth. So, so if you see China as a country that has needs and is very aware of those needs, that maybe gives you a slightly different perspective on what it's up to in Africa and Latin America and places like that. It might literally just need to make those deals, right? It might not just be like a trick to like take over Peru.
Yeah, and I mean, even if say this, they use debt as leverage, and say the same way that the IMF or the United States can and have it as leverage.
Yeah.
And I think that someone in the comments made a really good, an interesting point, saying that China would want the land because if say the Chinese yen collapses, they would need alternative capital to trade during the collapse. And I do think that if there is a potential currency crisis, depending on how things are going, based on that Twitter thread that you shared, that why not repo international airports, or why not protect mining interests in foreign countries that do provide capital or are likely to, which I think can exacerbate some of the issues. But if we could scroll down
Yeah.
lower to defense and law enforcement, I think this is where we can just talk about the trade aspect, but also some of the greater investments that are being made.
Okay, got it. Go ahead.
Um, Awesome. So, they say in the defense realm, the new document is notably silenced despite the range of ongoing defense cooperation initiatives that could have been mentioned, perhaps reflecting the Chinese perception of U.S. sensitivity towards its defense engagement in the region. But they have advocated for a superior defense forum, but they've also talked about the promotion of cooperation in aeronautics. So, the potential aspect of selling various fighter craft to the Argentine Air Force, highlighting previous sales of military aircraft and helicopters. But the last part that I thought was interesting, and maybe with your knowledge of trade, and this would be an area that we could talk about, was of particular interest. The document briefly also mentions collaboration in Antarctica. This is why I think Chile is not just important for the lithium, but also for geography, because it does encompass the southern part of the country, or the southern part of the world. Of particular interest, it mentions Antarctica. While the Chinese have long had research stations in the area, logistically supported from the south of Chile, the pro-Beijing Argentine government's recent decision to develop a polar logistics base, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, Ushuaia, and is a possible location of a space communications facility in the area, raises the prospect of expanded strategic presence by China, including icebreakers, the Zhulong 2 and the People's Liberation Army Navy ships in the area. Which is a really interesting way to bypass the ongoing fight sort of for the Arctic area, because while China is an observer member of the Arctic Council, the race is sort of heating up between the Scandinavian countries, the United States, and Russia in that region, because as the climate changes and we see more possible trade routes expand, the Arctic is looking rather appealing, but it's being contested by, say, the United States and Russia. So why not look towards the south?
Okay, so Antarctica, this is a big surprise, but I guess I'm starting to see some sense in it. Antarctica is not being looked to for resources, right? They're not wanting to mine in Antarctica. I mean, maybe that'll happen someday, but that doesn't seem to be in the cards right now. And it's not being looked to as a trade route, because Antarctica is a big continent, right?
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't give you a sea route in the way that the Arctic does. But it is useful for space, which I did not even think about. I guess you get, I don't know, a clearer shot at space in Antarctica than you would at much of in the non-polar regions of the world, is the idea, right?
Well, even having a greater presence, say, between that stretch of sea between South America and Antarctica would give you a good presence, not to mention to launch spacecraft, satellites, but it further strengthens China's investment in, say, satellite kill weapons or just greater emphasis on surveillance. So I think that South
Mm.
America, like I mentioned earlier, will definitely be a new front. So while for trade, right, there's this discussion about nuclear powered icebreaker fleets between the US and Russia in the north. In the south, there are cozy relationships with Argentina and Peru, or Argentina and Chile has put
Hmm.
them in a very interesting position for aerospace and aeronautical investment in the region, which I think all kind of
Hmm.
ties back about having this new economic bloc through sort of the through CELAC with China, because they're far more ideologically aligned. That makes South America a really interesting place for the future engagements on the world stage about sanctions or bypassing trade. And I think that's what China's really been doing with sort of the One Belt One Road or BRI initiatives. Is just that if you can bypass where the Americans have an interest or where the Russians have an investment or infrastructure, then China can sort of maintain its own self-sufficiency and be an alternative nation state to trade with.
That's interesting. So South America becomes sort of a free space on the map, so to speak, where no one else has really been uh, as interested. And so China sees an opportunity to slip in there while everybody's distracted in other parts of the world. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, yeah, but I mean, as we can tell right from the Congressional Research Service, that their investment over the last 20 years has almost exponentially grown from just a couple of 16 billion to now 316 in 2020, despite the pandemic. I mean,
Hmm.
I do think that this shows that we're going to see an increase, because I mean, they've kind of talked about the greater Eurasia aspect of the Belt and Road Initiative and expanding in Africa. But now they're really beginning to look at, Central and South America as sort of their way forward, right? And it's in the United States' backyard, which makes things really interesting from a geopolitics standpoint.
Hmm. Wow. This is so great because, like I said, we discussed the Belt and Road Initiative, and we didn't touch on Latin America at all. So this is like such a totally different angle. And for those of us who are like Americans, in some ways, right? South America's it's kind of on our side of the world, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay.
And
So anything else?
like you had
Go ahead.
Oh, all I was going to say is that while we're seeing this sort of bubbling discussion of trade war pop up between the United States and China, and I mean even the team Biden has kept a lot of what Trump has done. Do know that China's investments in South America are beginning to sort of pay itself off, while at the
Hmm.
same time, Team Biden isn't doing much about oil and natural gas. It's no longer energy independent, and it's not a net
Right.
exporter like it used to be under the Trump administration. So we're seeing this contracting pro green energy, high inflation, quote unquote transitory issue, right, with the current administration, while China's continuing to look like a greater and greater influence. And a
Hmm.
greater alternative than, say, the Western-backed U.S. dollar sort of international system.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds right. What you're saying. The only thing that confuses me is that you're saying China is putting a great emphasis on like going green domestically with energy.
Well, they're using nuclear, right? Whereas in
Hmm.
in the West, there's always this focus on. I think what the Mises article had shown was what he called intermittent about
Yeah.
solar and hydropower or wind
Wind.
power, right? Those
Yeah. Yeah.
things that require the wind or the sun to be out. Whereas China's definitely interested in having nuclear, which has been, I think, in my opinion, the better green quote unquote alternative.
Yeah. I follow this guy, or I see stuff from this guy Michael Schellenberg, I think. Anyway, he's always going on about trying to convince the United States to stop being afraid of nuclear power, and that it has lots of benefits, among which is that it could be argued that it's cleaner. Yes, you produce the nuclear waste, but I guess the proponents of nuclear power would say this is really small compared to what a coal factory belches into the atmosphere, say.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree. I'm very pro nuclear energy on that, on
Mm-hmm.
similar to Schellenberger. there are risks associated with it, and I can understand some of the large lobbying against it, say due to 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl. I do think
Hmm.
that our technology has increased, and I think that the best example to point to is the way that France does it.
Yeah.
France gets a large, if not outright majority of their energy from nuclear powered reactors. So if you want to compare like the geopolitical, but as well as the economic situation, just take a look at the comparison of France and Germany and see how well they're doing there.
Hmm. Oh, because you're saying
Yeah.
Germany has not had the nuclear power that France has.
No, at the time, Chancellor Angela Merkel, kind of to outflank the left Green Party, started taking a more environmental stance and shutting down nuclear reactors.
Mm.
And now there are only 3 nuclear reactors in the entire country that are still in operation.
And now Germany's desperate to make a deal with Russia, is what you're saying.
Well, they're in a position where Russia has the leverage.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to cover from this article?
No. If I what was the other article that I sent you? Just
The other one
the
was
the Daily
Time
Mail one.
magazine. The US and China are battling for influence in Latin America, and the pandemic has raised the stakes.
Can go over that real quick.
Yeah, okay. All right,
This
let me
was
move this up. Go ahead.
Sure. This was from a year ago, so this was in February 4th. So, yeah, almost a year to the day, and that's next Friday, February 4th, 2021. And if we could scroll down to the second paragraph here about the answer is that Paraguay.
Got it. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So there's a lot of discussion about where China's had a lot of influence in the area. There's very few countries that still recognize Taiwan. Paraguay was one of those countries. And that issue it has definitely plagued just greater continental influence in the region. Um, but as it goes down, it starts talking about how this has changed. It says in April 2020, as COVID-19 began to tear through Latin America, the leftist bloc in the Paraguayan Senate introduced a bill to open relations with Beijing, which would inevitably mean ending the recognition of Taiwan. The
Hmm.
senators argued that the pandemic would make Chinese support in the form of masks and ventilators, but also an investment, trade, and possibly a vaccine, crucial in the coming years. In the end, the proposal was voted down 25-16, and a Senate still controlled by the right wing opposition. But this was from a year ago. Actually, things have changed.
Hmm.
Paraguay has sort of changed its mind. And if anyone is sort of familiar about other ways of diplomacy, you'll have noticed in the press there's this argument about vaccine diplomacy. So the United States, I think, is with the UN's Vax program. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but both Russia and China have their own independent versions, which they've been using as ways to keep their spheres of influence firmly under their control, taking advantage of the pandemic. So
Hmm.
the Chinese vaccine Sinovac has been widely distributed since it was made available in South America, which has allowed the changing of relations to move as countries want PPE, ventilators, which of course during the beginning of this crisis, China was the exporter of
Hmm.
masks, gloves, and ventilators,
Right.
which I believe, some parts, they conveniently bought back right before things got really bad globally, only to put out again.
Hmm.
Which clever, right? Disaster
Right.
capitalism.
Right.
And so now they're doing the same thing with their own vaccine efforts, to where now they can use that as pressure to keep it going. And in our Telegram chat that we've been having, we've been talking with American Krogan. I said that this is a potential reason why you're still seeing a lot of restrictions and a lot of issues
Mm.
in Southern American states, because
Right.
you want to keep that relationship with China going and investment, and use the vaccine as a way to get investment, which was what a year ago the left wing opposition in the Paraguayan Senate was advocating for, was that this could be a way for trade and get more
Hmm.
money down the line, which has definitely been the case. Um, but if we could just scroll down towards, I believe, where the paragraph says for China. So underneath the picture of
Yeah.
farmland.
Got it.
Awesome. It says for China, the investment brings political returns. In the past 4 years, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, and Panama have each switched their recognition from Taiwan to China.
Hmm.
Gaining these kinds of alliances in Latin America offers Beijing invaluable votes at the UN and backing for Chinese appointees in multinational institutions. But it also empowers China to embed standard setting technologies in companies like Huawei, ZTE, Dahua, and Hikvision, all sanctioned by the US as regional infrastructure, allowing Beijing to dictate the rules of commerce for a generation. Which sort of goes back to the ongoing battle with the United States trying to get the West and other parts of South America to, sanction Huawei and some of these companies. I believe some of the biggest proponents to join the United States were the United Kingdom and Brazil. And Brazil, actually, not too long ago, changed their position on this with Huawei and allowed more Chinese investment into the country. So you can see how South America and Latin America has been this great area of economic influence in this battle over 5G and other, telecommunications technologies between sort of these global powers.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you wanted to add?
He just talks about standard setting technology companies. So his point, right, is and dictate the rules of commerce for a generation. That seems a little exaggerated, but I think I follow the point, which is just that there can be an advantage if you're China, you've really invested in the 5G standard or something like that. You're developing technologies against this standard. You convince various countries in Latin America to adopt the 5G standard or some other technical standard. Well, then you're in your best position to benefit from people adopting this standard, right? I think that's what he's getting at. And that it could put you in a strong position, he thinks, for a generation. I don't know. Technology can move pretty fast, but well, I don't know. For infrastructure, maybe he's right. When you're talking about building out cell towers or something like that, then this isn't something that you turn over every 12 months, right? So if you get them on your standard and they, wide investment with maybe some help from China, some loans, right? Wide investment to build out infrastructure against that standard, which China is, a standard that China is backing and investing in domestically, puts China in a nice position for some time to come. So anyway, I think that's what he was getting at in saying that it's not just random technology. It's the technology that establishes a standard upon which a whole industry is built around that standard, right?
Yeah. And then the last part I kind of wanted to cover, since I mentioned Panama earlier, it starts at the paragraph, U.S. ties run deep across Latin America, but perhaps deeper in Panama.
Yeah, got it. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So while we're talking about this railroad, also strengthen just sort of this to be Chinese owned, there's also a lot of push and pull for the Panama Canal about trade. So the country's namesake canal, through which trade flows between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, was completed by the U.S. Army and controlled by Washington for almost an entire century. In the 1940s, the U.S. Department of Commerce set up a free trade zone in Colón, a city near the canal's entrance. The Colón Free Trade Zone, the ZLC, quickly became a gateway for American firms such as Gillette, Coca-Cola, and Pfizer to enter the Latin American market. Yet today, 7 decades later, things have changed in the ZLC. Across its 1,000-hectare sprawl of ports, warehouses, and offices, Chinese companies dominate. China accounts for the largest share of imports that come into the zone, over 40% total, says Giovanni Ferrari, a manager of the zone. Ferrari says the surge of Chinese products began in around 2010, and he expects it to grow as China seeks to boost its trade with the rest of the world in the wake of the pandemic. China has identified the potential of Panama and the ZLC as a reference point for distribution. So you're seeing sort of this two-front thing here, where, yes, the Americans are vastly interested in maintaining, their own influence and their own background with Panama and their control of they no longer control it, but they have a lot of interest and influence in the area. And we're sort of seeing China not only have sort of this transcontinental railroad they want to put up in South America to have cross-continental trade, but they're also now beginning to really have a significant share of the imports that come through the zone, which, Chinese exports have been growing massively since the late 1990s to today. So this doesn't surprise me, but from a geopolitical standpoint, you're seeing two fronts, because you're still trying to test the waters about how are the Americans going to respond to such activity in their own backyard. But I thought seeing so much interest, in the canal and this railroad kind of tells you that, they're very serious about the investment in this region. I do think that they really do want to keep business afloat.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of picturing this Cologne Free Trade Zone. It says 1,000 hectare sprawl of ports, warehouses, and offices. So yeah, you go to Panama near the canal's entrance, and you've got this all these warehouses. I assume that they bring imports in and they figure out where they're going to go next from there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, sorry, it stuck out to me, Prudentialist, because when my wife and I go shopping at Costco, we drive through, I don't know what to call it, a low area near a river, um, and it's just filled with warehouses. So like I'm visually picturing a place like this because we drive through this place, Amazon warehouses, but many others, and they're massive, and it's basically an area that had not really been residential. It was probably
Wow.
farms were there or something, and for some reason it's become kind of like this ZLC thing here, where companies just put their massive warehouses if they want to have one in the St. Louis area. That's where they put them. There's just a lot of land, and I guess it's suitable for this sort of thing. Anyway, so I'm picturing exactly what they're talking about. It's warehouses are sort of kind of like um, they're sort of kind of like ports in a way in our modern economy, right? It's a place where you bring a lot of stuff and then distribute from there. They're distribution points, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't been to that area of the world, but I mean, considering I drive to Dallas quite often, and I can see some of the massive warehouses just
Hmm.
out from the city area about, say
Exactly.
Amazon or Wish fulfillment centers, and I can just only imagine that on a very large scale. So no, I
Right.
see exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
But I guess sort of to bring some my thoughts of what I've talked about on not only on my channel but also what we went over here is that I think that you raised a good point about this desire to do business because I do think that China wants to maintain that business relationship, and if all else fails, right? Like they know that they have the China, these nations where they want them. They've got vaccine diplomacy, they have infrastructure diplomacy.
Hmm.
They're the primary area for extractive imports. All of which, right? China's willing to trade, technology, nuclear, material, and start promoting possible defense infrastructure being shared. So I think that they do want to keep it afloat. They do want this business venture to work out because a relationship with Panama, trying to fix the relationship with Peru to make sure that this railroad happens. I think that this is very telling that this isn't just a sort of dollar, diplomacy, dollar imperialism that we've kind of seen from the West, but also some rather serious projects to keep China afloat economically for the resources that it does need. Um, so I mean, moving these things through the canal, putting this greater political influence with leftist governments, and getting countries to shift their perspective on Taiwan does really indicate. I do think, just like Africa, but I think just because it's in the United States' backyard, this is going to be an area that we will see articles, reports, and both economic and strategic analysis on for decades to come.
Mm. Just wanted to shout out the thumbnail. I asked our graphic designer what he chose to show there. Copper, iron, and silver. He said he took those from exports from Peru to China. So when you talk about extractive industries, that's the fancy term for mining, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be it. Billions of dollars in mining investment, like we mentioned with the
Right.
Congressional Research Service, and especially with lithium, copper, iron, silver, things that you would need for not only construction but just a lot of more advanced electrical engineering,
Right.
batteries, portable
Right.
technology, medical equipment.
Yeah, technology. Key components of modern technology, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what else do you want to? You sent me a couple other things. What else would you like to highlight? We did hit that lithium triangle already.
What else did I? What did we
Okay.
not
Well,
gone over?
there's
Would be the better
Belton Road.
question.
Oh, Asia Times article. There it
Oh,
is.
there we go.
Belton Road encircles Latin America and the Caribbean. Anything you want to draw from that?
Let's see. Yeah, let's start with the Cuba joins the Belt and Road. It's just a little bit downwards.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so it says on December 25th, 2021, Cuba and China signed a cooperation plan for the joint promotion of the Belt and Road Initiative. Call it a Christmas present for U.S. President Joe Biden, Senator Marco Rubio, and others in Washington, D.C., who don't like either country. or a reminder that Taiwan is not the only offshore island of strategic interest. Cuba joined the Belt and Road in 2018 through a memorandum of understanding. The cooperation plan, in the words of China's Global Times, clarifies key projects for China and Cuba, including infrastructure, technology, culture, education, tourism, energy, communications, and biotechnology, which are in line with Cuba's plans for the short and long term. Which this kind of brings the interesting point, in my perspective, that as the ongoing crisis plays out between the United States and Russia over Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
um, I've had conversations with Russians that live in the area, but also Russian expats, and they said one of the biggest concerns about the Ukraine situation was that it might lead to what they call another Caribbean crisis, or what we know as the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, Russian President Vladimir Putin had said that we are considering the idea, or the idea of putting, Russian infrastructure, military infrastructure in Cuba is not off the table. And if you remember not too long ago that Iran, Russia, and China had held joint military exercises, including naval exercises, that this, encircling and sort of entrenching your position in Cuba, just, a couple, less than 100 miles off of the coast of Florida,
Yeah.
sort of really reaffirms that fear about the Caribbean crisis, as the Russians call it, this Cuban Missile Crisis. Because what's the worry about, Ukrainian entry into NATO is that usually that implies the deployment of short range ballistic missiles on that country's territory, which, given the vast swaths of Ukraine, I mean, that's right on Russia's border. They wouldn't want that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge security concern. So
Yeah.
I do think that Cuba joining the Belt and Road Initiative only makes a greater worry for the future, that we're going to see, not only is this island nation that has its well-developed independent agricultural sector. The last I understood it, they've, given a lot of money to keeping Venezuela afloat. They buy a lot of Venezuelan oil despite sanctions. That this is this ongoing sort of train from Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, and China, this sort of anti-American bloc, is going to continue economically, but also strategically.
Right. A quick personal note, Prudentialist. I was born in outside of Miami, and my mother took a Girl Scout trip to Cuba. This is pre-revolution, back in the
Yeah.
50s, I suppose. That's how my point is. That's how close it is, right? They just, hey, let's take the troop and go over to Cuba. I don't think it feels that close right now because of all these years of animosity between Cuba and the United States, right? But before that, it was going to Cuba was no big deal. It's like for people in Texas driving across the border to Mexico or something, right? I mean, it's just about like that, I think.
Well, having lived in El Paso, yeah, I'm sure back then it felt like just crossing the bridge from El Paso to Juarez. Although things are
Right.
are definitely different now, I'm sure.
Right. Okay. So, anything else from this article?
If we could go down to economic and strategic challenges.
Oh, last thing I
It'll
wanted
be
to
towards the
last
end.
thing that
Oh, go ahead.
struck me there in the quote about the China and Cuba, the areas they're going to focus on. Infrastructure was the first word in the list. I can't help keep noticing this theme. Okay, what am I supposed to go down to now?
Economic and strategic challenges.
Okay. Down a bit. Okay, got it.
So it started the IMF working paper. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so Chinese investment in Latin America, sectoral, complementary, in just the rebalancing of what China wants to do. And they're just sort of highlighting some of the big parts here, where infrastructure gets focused a lot, but there's also diversification, right? Just a diverse range of things. Over the last decade, China's investment in Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, has increased substantially in volume, has become more diversified. Once heavily concentrated in fossil fuels, metal, agricultural, and other natural resources, Chinese investment in the LAC is increasingly tilted towards manufacturing and service industries such as transport, electricity, financial services, and information and communication technology. Asia, particularly China, accounts for almost a third of the LAC's inward foreign direct investment stock, followed by Europe and the U.S. with shares of 30 and 20% respectively. So we can sort of see that China is definitely in the lead, and that it last sort of quips at the bottom that Brazil's received the most Chinese attention in the region, but investments range all over. So despite the American pressure on Bolsonaro's government and even the criticisms that he's more than open and willing to receive Chinese investment in the area, which is much needed, in my opinion, considering the economic situation of the country.
So I'm thinking of a parallel. This is going back a ways, but my understanding is that a lot of development of the United States actually came from British investment, like say throughout the 19th
Mm-hmm.
century. So it just feels like, in a way, the whole developing world is China's China's U.S. or China's West, or Wild West or whatever. Like they're seeing these up and coming markets and they're jumping in. And I know that that's a huge emphasis in my own industry, right? What do they call them? Global GGOs or something, global growth opportunities, something like that. Anyway, there's all this lingo to basically say, hey, don't forget that though these guys are maybe small players compared to Western Europe and the United States and so forth, they're up and comers. So make sure you pay attention to them. This is a big emphasis throughout the investment world. And China
Well,
seems to be just completely on top of that game, the GGO game.
Well, no, I agree with you, because it kind of reminds me of that conversation that you would hear a lot in economic and also like foreign policy circles about BRIC countries, right? Brazil, right. Russia, India, China. And if you're going to get a relationship between these BRICS, so to speak, seeing that China is now one of the largest economies in the world, which, however you want to look at those numbers, could be a different stream for another time. But the fact that they're investing so much in Brazil is kind of indicative that, hey, you're going to have one of the most populous countries in the region now, sort of, the stronger economic cooperation with China. I think that whole GGO thing, it makes a lot of sense, especially once we're seeing just the amount of money that has gone in from, like, the CRS paper from 2002 to 2020, just almost 20 years, and just this almost, straight up line of investment.
Yeah, well, China's no longer, what was it that they had this period in their history where they sent an explorer, supposedly he even maybe made it to the Americas, I don't know. And then they burned the ships and decided, no, we're going to be insular,
Yeah, and
right.
That's a history argument I've heard a lot. Is that when China starts to expand globally, it usually comes back with a sharp retraction of insularity. But I do think that Xi Jinping, even since he started talking about Chinese governance when he took office in 2014, that he's been adamantly against sort of that insular thing. The argument that the century of humiliation is over, that you can't just ignore the world. I always like the phrase, the world doesn't pause, but Xi Jinping, as he's been sort of concentrating power, he's been very adamant that China will be an international middle kingdom, the center of attention.
Right. Yeah, I didn't bring it up to say they're going to become insular again. I just meant that to contrast.
Oh, no, I didn't imply that you were.
To contrast insular China with what the picture that you're painting for us today, right? I mean, this is a super internationally focused country at this point. They're all over the place. I mean, Antarctica, for goodness sake, like, whoa.
Yeah, they've got plans and putting themselves in positions to not what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, even if they do want to sort of push back against the United States or Russia, in their pursuit geographically, they also have areas where they've more or less cleaned house and are the dominant investor.
Right. Okay, so anything else from this article? Otherwise, we just had two final images you had shared.
Oh, yeah, let's go to the images, and I think that would be a good place to wrap up. I think visualizing is always a good way to finish off.
So red wave, the number of nations that formally recognize Taiwan as the government of China is dwindling. So the red countries have formal relations with China. The blue have formal relations with Taiwan only. And there's not much left that's on the Taiwan side, which is a rough proxy for being like U.S. aligned or U.S. empire aligned, I suppose, if your formal relations are with Taiwan only, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty good gauge. The last I checked, I think Paraguay, has recently shifted to their position or plan to. is that out of all of the United Nations recognized countries, only 14 internationally recognized China, including the Holy See. So there's not much room for the United States to get leverage, and there are quite a few in Central and Latin America that do it. And
Hmm.
most recently, one that started engaging diplomatically was Lithuania, which had this whole spur about containment language from the Americans. But yeah, to sort of this image, I think really emphasizes just how much diplomatic pressure China has in using um, just their economic and also now their vaccine influence on the region.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, this map. The red and blue aren't exactly symmetrical. So the red means you have formal relations with China and the U.S. relations with China, right? Um, the
Yes, we
blue
do.
mean
We don't even recognize Taiwan as an official country.
so I'm sorry, we don't?
No, we don't. Well, I mean, we
Oh,
we
I
don't
forgot about
have we
that.
have a quasi embassy there akin to the Brits, but I mean, our recognition, I believe, since '79 has been sort of this, two separate Chinas, but they're kind of together. We
Hmm.
recognize them, but we have a formal relationship with both, but our diplomatic ties are officially with the Chinese.
Hmm. And so the blue is formal relations with Taiwan only, because I
Yeah.
suppose you could have formal relations with both, or does it not really work that way? China won't play ball with you unless you
Well, these nations actually
denounce Taiwan.
recognize Taiwan as a state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay,
And
right.
if your audience wants to know more about the Taiwanese question, I have a whole length.
This image, let's see how that looks. Yeah, okay, I think that's okay. Covers up a little bit. All right, so this finally is Latin America's trade growth with China is outstripping that with the rest of the world. Okay, so Latin America and China trade growth is stronger than trade growth of Latin America with everybody but China, is what their point is here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um,
and this is a
by
bit
quite a
older.
bit,
This
by
covers
quite a bit. Yeah.
yeah. It's a bit of an older graph. It goes from 2000 to 2013. But a lot of this kind of just demonstrates what China's getting out of it, right? The five main
Mm-hmm.
exports to China per country. So you'll see
Mm-hmm.
everything from crude oil, steel, a lot of metals. But there's some that really kind of stuck out to me. Like Ecuador, for instance, is about like has shellfish up there.
Huh. They need
Argentina's
food.
got, of
They
course,
need food in China.
they sure do. Things like leather from Venezuela, a lot of soy, sugar, and pulp from places like Brazil and Argentina. So these are the primary products percentage wise of the country's total exports. So you can see that on the left, the primary products as percentage of total exports from Latin America. The rest of the world compared to China, you can just see the absolute difference. But this is again from 2000 to 2013. So that last
Hmm.
sort of bar graph about manufacturing, I'm sure has definitely changed as China's diversified and put more influence on, mining equipment, refineries, manufacturing, roads, and communication
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure. So we can just see over the since the turn of the century, just how much China's put into this region. And I do think that because CELAC has been given much more importance over the Organization of American States, that that this will stay for quite some time.
Right. So I was going to ask, I sort of have what perhaps is now an outdated image that, China's, what do they call it? The manufacturer of the world or something like that. Um,
Hmm.
China's bringing in raw materials, which is what we're seeing here with these exports to China from these Latin American countries. It's all raw materials, basically, right?
Yeah,
Metals and food and you know agricultural products and so forth. Pretty much, it's mostly sort of raw stuff that then goes to China and gets made into something else, right? That's sort of the older picture I have, right? That China's sucking in raw goods, higher order goods, as Austrian economists put it. They're sucking in those higher order goods and then bringing them through the manufacturing process closer to something that consumers want, right? Including Chinese consumers, not to be left
yeah,
out of the picture for sure. Um, but what you're telling me is that that's a little bit outdated, and we would see more of China, investing in supporting manufacturing in Latin America, say, and not just sucking the raw materials out, right?
Well, I'm sure that they're doing both for sure, but at the same time, that the manufacturing to produce goods is happening there. Things that would allow these countries to maintain that infrastructure that's being invested in as well. I think that you're only seeing a greater integration of the sucking on raw materials, because now not only can you suck the raw materials, but you're now having a country that can produce those goods themselves, or produce the infrastructure on their own. That way, you can then just ship it across a railway, or to have greater, relations with Panama to ship it across the canal. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's just a greater integration of what they want to accomplish.
Okay, well, this is great because I was completely ignorant of China in Latin America, and you've made it clear that let's see it. How do I put it? It seems like this is something that's going to be obvious to everybody soon enough, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's not something most people would think of, that China's got this big involvement in Latin America. Give it another 20 years, and I suspect most people will be aware of it if things continue in the direction that that you've laid out here, right? Unless there's some big, I don't know, political shift or something dramatic happens. It looks like China is just increasing and increasing its involvement with Latin America, right?
Yeah, I do think that I don't want to. I mean, there is a degree of interdependence, right, between the two countries. So,
Mm-hmm.
as Dale C. Copeland writes about economic interdependence in war, which is a fantastic read. He says that things really only begin to change diplomatically, or even with the risk of war, if the expectation of trade is expected to be negative between the two partners. So it's not, does the interdependence increase the likelihood of war or decrease the likelihood of war? It's the expectation of trade. And given how much
Mm-hmm.
investment there's been, greater cooperation between these nations and their governmental organizations, I don't know if we'll see a major shift anytime soon. I do think that these parties are quite happy and well off together.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's what economists tend to point to, right? That trade is ideally a win-win scenario, and so far that's how everybody seems to be seeing it in these relationships between China and the Caribbean and South America, right? There, everybody's
It
winning in
looks
this
like it.
deal. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and so it's only the people who want, the unipolar full spectrum dominance of the global American empire that maybe wouldn't be so happy with the picture that you've laid out.
That tends to be the case.
Yeah,
The cooperative security or American primacy types, as Barry Posen
right,
calls them.
right. American primacy. That's a good word for it. Okay, let me take this picture down, or oh yeah, switch us over to just the two of us, and then we do have a couple super chats. And I'm sorry, it'll take me just a moment. I didn't have my that ready to go here. Let me open those, and we'll go through those and wrap it up. Okay, so subscribe star. I know we have at least one thing over there from a supporter. And then YouTube. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, Sam153, faithful supporter of many of us. He says, for Econ Minis, we'll miss next episode. All right, thanks, Sam. And then, okay, 3 super chats here. So first of all, LaRue, there's an X at the end. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to pronounce it. LaRue, let's see, lost 50% of my crypto net. Not optimistic about its future with the looming crash. Have plenty of physical gold. I'll come out of this better than most, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the greatest investment advisor. Um, Instability in the financial system. So having plenty of physical gold sounds good. You're saying that you've lost 50% of your crypto net. I guess because he sold when it was down or something. I mean, anyway, my impression of the crypto stuff is that it's a long play. basically. It's jumping in and out is for those who are very bold, and for the rest of us, it's more you buy it and hold on to it, because the long term
Yeah,
trend of
I look at
Bitcoin, for
it.
example, is up. Go ahead.
I look at it as very volatile and, like you said, long play. But I prefer money in gold and silver is what I have a good chunk in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, as you may know, Austrian economists have a long, cozy relationship with the hard money types. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and then the final two are just complimenting you on your looks. So Big Nig 420
Oh
says,
well.
prude looking sharp today. Um, and there's like a sweating emoji. Ooh. Okay. And then Uber Soy says the Prudentialist looks classy, cool style. Yeah, and I'm sorry, you said that you had not traditionally been on camera on your channel. Is that correct?
No,
That's
no,
what I
I
thought.
typically don't. So
Oh, and you
yesterday and
still
today
don't.
were sort of
You.
the first. I still don't. No, or
Oh,
it's
okay.
been
I
on
see.
everyone else's stuff, not me.
Okay.
But no,
Okay.
actually, this is
Interesting.
sort of my actual. This is how I normally dress, and minus
Oh,
usually the
really?
jacket or
Okay.
whatever. But yeah, you do things like debate and stuff for years, and you get used to the formal wear and things like that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure it's clear to everybody that, though I don't wear a bow tie every day, I wear a bow tie every time I do the show because of the branding we chose for the show. But I don't wear a bow tie every day, but I do wear a jacket and tie every day. That would be typical dress for me unless I'm just doing farm chores or something. But when I'm doing work, even though I've been working from home for 2 years now, I found that after a week or two of trying the sweatsuit pajama type approach, I just it just wasn't working for me mentally. I needed to like get into my work uniform.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not because the company I work at, I'm the only one who dresses like this. I'm in a big, company you would have heard of, and it's even the CEO would not dress like I do. So it's just me. It's not my profession. It's just a personal thing.
It's a
Um,
style choice.
yeah, yeah. In fact, I wrote an article when I started dressing this way. 1 year after starting to dress this way, the anniversary of starting to dress this way, called the Year of Dressing Dangerously, and I reflected on why I had made the decision and people's reactions. You know, because when I started dressing this way, it's funny. I must have changed somehow because in that first year, I got a lot of feedback, both positive and negative. To me dressing this way. And then after a couple years, I guess people must sense that this is just how I dress or something, because the comments sort of started to dry up. Just every so often, some African American or something will say, "You looking clean," that's sort of. I'll still get those comments occasionally, but for some reason, when I first started dressing this way, I mean, these are just strangers, right? Like they don't know how often I dress this way. But in the first year, I got like so much feedback, and then it just sort of petered out after a while. Now, 20 years later, hardly anyone says anything. They're just like, "Oh, I guess that's how he dresses." Anyway, okay. Well, thank you
It
so
comes with,
much.
it comes with the territory.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much, Prudentialist, for joining me. I will see how this goes. I don't know what I'll be able to do, but my thinking is that with Mad Murkoff doing what he's doing with his career and Ryan busy this semester with the class, they've been my usual co-hosts. I thought I'd give it a try, especially for the Econ Minis, to just bring in some ringers like Prudentialist who bring knowledge in various areas that are of interest to the show. And we'll see. I might just end up asking Prudentialist a lot. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't actually have like a schedule or a plan. I just thought I would try to start to rotate through. We've got a nice network, right, Prudentialist, of as I mentioned, find my friends, right? We've got a nice network that's reflected there and goes beyond that, I would say. We know a lot of people at this point who can jump on camera and talk knowledgeably about various things. I'm thinking off the top of my head, right? Oliver, whose channel is Semiagog, is quite good on a number of international uh, stories or topics. Um, and then we have many other folks we can draw on various things. So we'll see. We'll see if sort of going round robin and drawing on various friends what I can come up with. But it got us off to a good start, that's for sure. So thank you. 1 hour away from a stream on the Distributists channel. In fact, how about let me make it easy for y'all. And I ought to be able to come up with that channel and stick it in the live chat so that you a moment. So in 1 hour, Distributist will be on hosting with the Prudentialist and others talking about this upcoming event in just a couple weeks, which you can still join us at. So, boy, you don't have a link to the stream, do you? Has he put one up yet?
I don't know if he's put it up yet, but I know that there
Okay.
was a discussion in Discord about having it.
Yeah, no, it seems quite certain it's happening.
Yeah.
I just thought
Here,
I would point
I'll-
right to the stream. Yeah, see if he shared something out. I hate the way YouTube.
He's got it on his channel.
On YouTube.
Yeah, it's on his channel. It's upcoming in an hour.
Okay, how do you do that? So when I go to the Distributist, I go to Home, I go to Videos, or anybody else's channel. I don't see what's coming. I only see past
So when you
stream.
you should be able to press the sort button and sort it by live stream. But I sent it to you in Discord so you can put it on there.
Oh, okay, I'll just do that. Yeah, I would like, because that's something that's been very confusing to me. I would think that if I was going to Academic Agent's channel and wanted to see his show that's starting in 30 minutes, it would be like front and center. Like I wouldn't be able to miss it. I've never been able to find it. I find it because he tweets it out.
Go in. So like if you're on desktop, you can press the sort button and then you can sort by videos, order, recent, or whatnot, and then it can also be sort by upcoming live stream.
So on videos, okay, sort by, sorry guys, most popular, date added, and date added oldest, and date added newest. That's the only choices I have.
Huh. So go to the
like
tab where it says videos and then do it.
That's what I'm on. Oh, I see, over on the left.
Huh.
Sorry, it's not sort by it.
There you
it
go.
Says uploads, all videos, uploads, upcoming live streams. Hey, and there it is. Thank you. Learn how to work YouTube.
No worries.
Okay. All right. Teach Stephen live. Okay, so then let me go to our stream and just pop that in there. Yeah, okay. So in 1 hour, please join that to learn more about the event, and would love to see you there. We'll see if it all works out because, as you can imagine, it's logistically complicated. But I'm hoping to have my wife with me, so that would be such a
wonderful.
pleasure for folks to meet you all and introduce you to Mrs. Radlib. She is, they talk about the better half and all that, but I mean, wait till you meet her. It's no joke. She is like, she is a stellar person. I'm humbled that she married me. Okay, so thanks everybody. I don't think there's anything else to say. We've showed that thing coming up in an hour. And oh yeah, sorry. Final bit of business is that I've got to take next week off. Unfortunately, I'll be in court. Don't worry, nothing big, but that's what I'll be doing. And then our next part of the Black Horse series on the 2008 crisis will be 2 weeks from tonight. That'll be the next show. So we'll finish our deep dive on that. So talk to you all next time.